All right, so hopefully you've got rotations down. So now the next step is, how do we get rid of a completed line? This will happen right after we change instances into solids is when we need to check for that. So right before we create a shape here, I'm in the move down method. Then I need to actually check for a completed line. I think I'm going to create a new script for that. Let's see, complete line. So that's the name of the script I'm going to have, and I'm going to call that here. Right before I create a new shape. So inside of complete line, my goal is I need to actually walk across from left to right, all of the shapes, and make sure that I have the correct number going across. So if I look at my room, in my particular game, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns. That matters. The other thing I need to note is where the actual shapes are going to be. So mine starts at 32 for the x and 416 for the y. So I'm just going to put those in. 32, 416 is bottom left block, 10 columns. If you've altered your game, it may be different than mine. That's why I want you to note that. Also, my blocks are not centered, so that's the upper left of that particular block. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to count going across how many of those things have solid. So I'm going to create a new variable, count. It's going to start at 0. And now I'd like to go across 32, 416. I'm going to use a special kind of loop called a for loop for this. It turns out that while loops also would work, but a for loop combines them together. So a for loop is made up of 3 parts. It has a variable. So I'm going to say, let's see, my x. And it's going to start at 32. Next is how long you're going to go until you stop doing this for loop. So, well, my x is less than, let's see, how big is my room? So if it gets to 352, that's off the side. So I want to keep going while it's less than 352. So I'm going to say in the comments, wall starts at 352. And then I'm going to say what's going to happen at each step. So I'm going to add on to my x 32. So those are the 3 parts of the for loop. What happens initially, how long you keep going until, and then the last step is what happens at the end of the loop. So I'm going to add 32 on after each time I go through. These are semicolons in between. That's how you know where it stops. So there's 2 semicolons in this. Actually, if place object, is it place object? Is that the name of that thing? What's it called? I forget. Help. Place meeting. There it is. So I'm going to do place meeting at a particular x and y, which are going to be variables that I'm using, and which object I'm looking for. So I'm going to be looking for solids. Meaning the x is my x. I'm going to create a variable up here called my y, which I'm going to set at 416 for now. Of course, that's going to change in a moment. My y. And I'm looking at solids, because those are the things I'm going to collide with. If indeed I do collide with that, I'm going to add 1 to count. All right, so if I've walked through that entire thing and I have exactly the right number, I need to go back through and delete all those things. I think I'm going to create a variable here, which I'm going to call num columns. And I'm doing that so that if you have a different number of columns in your game, you can just change that. That might alter this number as well. So if count is exactly the same as num columns, which means if there is a complete row, I need to walk through and delete each of those. Okay, so how do I do that? Is there some way that I can pick out each one that I want? Of course there is. I think I'm going to use something that's called collision point. So what this does is collision point checks x and y to see if there's a collision with a particular object. You can use precise or not is what the prec means. Not me is whether or not you want to consider this object. So for example, if you had another moving block and you wanted to check to see that it wasn't you that was in that spot, you could do that. The trick here is that it's going to return, all these functions return the ID of the thing that you're touching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, pick out that particular guy's ID number, and then delete it. I'm going to basically do the same thing that I did with that for loop before. My x is less than 352 in my game. My x plus equals 32. Now you may remember that to delete things, you actually need to have a with statement to use instance destroy. So actually, now that I think about that, is there a better method? Is there a way to destroy something at a particular point? Position destroy, that sounds awesome. What does position destroy do? Instance exists, instance multiples. Position destroy, that sounds awesome. Destroys all instances whose sprite contains position x and y. Well, that might work, but the problem is that if you've got any kind of background objects, that would not be good. So I'll stick with my original plan. With collision point, I believe is what it was. Yes. My x, my y. I'm checking for solids. Precise. I don't know that it matters. Not me. True. Why not? So I'm saying with that particular block, instance destroy. So what will happen in this loop? This one walks through the same column that I just went through. So the x position is changing each time through. So the first time through it's 32, then it's 64, 96, so on. This particular method goes through and if there is a collision with that object at this point, it gives you back the ID number, and I say, hey, with that ID number, destroy it. So this method will go through that row and delete it.